Everybody, welcome back to the Cohesion Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Brady Pyle. He's the Chief HR and Inclusion Officer at Space Center Houston. It's a leading nonprofit science and space exploration learning center that serves as the official visitor center for NASA's Johnson Space Center. I previously served in a variety of HR roles for NASA, retiring in February 2023 after a 30-year career with the federal government. Welcome to the show, Brady.
Thanks so much, Shawn. Excited to be here. And yeah, that title's a new one. Our CEO was especially excited when he learned he could call me the Cheerio of the organization.
That's great. I mean, it's better than, I don't know, the flakes of the organization,
Right.
or the Lucky Charm. I don't know. Lucky Charms might be okay.
That's true. There could be other options there.
No, that's great. I love that acronym. That's really cool. Well, what we do is like we love to kick off by just finding out a little bit more information about you. We've got some. I don't think they're silly. I think they kind of uncover your personality a little bit. But I've got four questions for you
hmm
to kick things off. The first one is, what are the top 5 most opened apps on your phone?
All right. So I usually start my day with Space City Weather. That's an app that talks about the local weather here in Houston. I use LinkedIn quite a bit. I use Facebook quite a bit as well. And then probably the other frequent apps, I actually look at Fox News and CNN, usually realizing the truth is somewhere between the two.
I saw, there's an app out there that will rank the news stories. So it's sort of based off of, are they in the middle? Are they left? Are they right? And then be like, now you figure it out,
You choose, right?
pulling it together. Yeah. Like pull it all together. Well, and LinkedIn a lot. That's no surprise. I want to do like a digital HR high five.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, your next question, what is a common myth about your field of expertise?
Yeah, so I like to think of having an expertise in the field of leadership. And I would say a common myth there is that people think about leadership, about management positions and management roles. And a lot of times you can find leadership and people who have good influence throughout the organization. Sometimes your poorest leaders are in management roles and your best leaders are not. And so that is a common myth that I've seen throughout my career.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a different. I don't want to dive completely, and I know we're going to
Yeah.
talk about this, but that's a slightly different take than what I've heard in the past, which is it's almost a cliche, which is there's a difference between a manager and a
Mhm.
leader. But you take it a step further and say, hey, you could have a leader that's an IC, has no
Mhm.
direct reports somewhere in the company. Just as a quick follow up, what does that usually look like if they're not in a management role? But you would consider them a leader or may even invest in them as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to think of leadership the way John Maxwell talks about it. Leadership is influence. So if you think of someone who has influence, yeah, that can be an entry level employee who comes to the organization with new ideas. Maybe they recently graduated with a degree, have the latest knowledge from academia that they're bringing into the organization, and they can influence the organization strategies, policies, ideas immediately as a brand new employee and not having a management role.
Awesome. Yeah, that really. Did you ever read Seth Godin's book, Lynchpin? Do you know? Have you heard of that
I've
before?
heard of it. I've not read that particular one.
A little bit like
Yeah.
that. And the interesting thing about linchpins, as they develop, they opt out of the management roles.
hmm
So they become critical to the business, high potential to the business, but it's okay. I don't need to manage a lot of people. I can be a leader in another way.
Yeah, and Sean, just playing with that a little bit, the NASA really learned that we had to push kind of a dual career path, that we didn't want everyone in management and leadership positions. Sometimes we wanted their expertise to deepen and some of your best technical experts don't have the proclivity to or don't want to be bothered by managing people. And so how do you play to those strengths in the organization? And so you needed a dual career path where folks could grow that technical expertise and continue to grow from a compensation perspective as well.
That's awesome. I feel like I should slide you $20 under the table, and you can show your Radford Carta ladders that you had at NASA and everything else on that dual track, which
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
kind of holy grail to get that down and make sure people understand it. But that's fantastic. Well, the next question, we'll get back to the personal questions on here. This one's it can be harder to answer. I think sometimes it's like it feels like an interview question. What's what's an insult that you've received that you're proud of?
So when I entered Space Center Houston, our budgeting process has been marked in the past by kind of a view of scarcity. And
Mm,
we're a growing organization now. We're in good financial position, but our chief financial officer told me when I first submitted my first HR budget uh, that I was spending too much. And I think meant it as an insult, but uh, I kind of pushed back and said, look, we need to invest more in people. And fortunately, the CEO was there in alignment with that position and wanting to invest more. So we actually expanded our training and development offerings and some of our benefits and wellness budgets as well. So the spending too much notion has turned into, hey, we're investing more and more in our workforce and in our people.
oh, it's fantastic. I'm sure you've been in those meetings or had conversations with the CEO. You're talking about vision, mission, values, whatever it is you have set up, and that always comes up. Like our most valuable asset
Yeah,
are our people, and then well, let's invest in training and development. Like let's invest. Oh, wait.
that's too much. Yeah, you're going
hold,
too far. Going too
hold,
far.
hold on a minute. Our people are the diamonds in the rough, but no. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, final personal question. I want you to put your X Files hat on, and I've seen in your background, you've got sci-fi stuff, things like that. So,
Yeah.
what's a mystery? Like, if you could know the answer to one mystery, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say right now it's figuring out how we can get to Mars um, and not impact the human body. So things that we haven't figured out for the journey to Mars yet are the effects of radiation on the body with that kind of journey, if you will, and then the effect on even eyesight, bone density. There's a lot of stuff that we have to figure out to make that kind of trip, and NASA's doing a lot to try to study that with longer duration flights on the space station, but we're still in low Earth orbit where radiation's a little bit different than when you go deeper space, and so a lot of people would like to figure that one out.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that like I'm going to say about the business, about the organization.
Yeah,
These are things
sure.
that you care about instead of just the people. Do you know how long it would take us right now to get to Mars?
It's roughly a year journey to get there and then a year to get back. So um, you have to really time it the way the planets align to
Hmm.
consider your launch. Like even when we send robotic missions to Mars and to deep space, um, the planets are constantly moving, so you got to figure out the right window of time for those launches to where you can get there in an optimal time. So there's a lot of rocket scientists figuring all that out.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of that, like you were at NASA for 30 years. Um, and I'm curious, what did you start at NASA working with people doing HR type of stuff, or is that something you sort of fell into as you were there?
Yeah, so it's little of both. My journey was I knew when I went into college, I was studying political science and public administration. I knew I wanted a career in the government. Texas A&M at the time was one of the few universities that had a co-op program for non-engineering students. So I knew I wanted to go there and then be part of the co-op program. Well, my first co-op assignment was at the Department of Health and Human Services in their personnel or HR office. I had interviewed in Washington, D.C., but they said, hey, we usually hire grad students. I was a sophomore at the time. So they said, go work in our Dallas regional office. And I just fell in love with HR. And so I went into our HR management grad program at A&M. And one of the things I did is I conducted a study of HR offices and federal HR offices in Texas. NASA said, hey, we don't have time to fill out the survey, but we'd be glad to talk to you. I talked to them and said, man, I'd love to work here because they had a generalist concept kind of for HR consultants, basically.
Yep. Yep.
And it was one of the few federal agencies at the time where all of your customers were kind of on campus. So when I worked in Dallas for Health and Human Services, we serviced a 5-state region. So most of
Wow.
your client interaction was on the phone. So NASA said, well, we're not hiring. And then they came back to me later and said, hey, if you'd be interested in a grad co-op, come. Yeah, I'm in. So started there and then, figured I'd be there a couple of years and move to something different. Like a lot of people do that enter NASA that didn't grow up dreaming of working there. A lot of people say, I'll work there a few years. And then we never leave. It's just too exciting. You're learning something new about the space program. You're working around these just amazing people. It's a unique place.
You said when you first started as your journey in getting in there that you did an assessment of like the health and human services that working with people. Do you remember any findings or things that you discovered then that are potentially the same now, or were there findings that you came across where you're like, oh, we don't have that problem anymore. We've solved that.
So 30 years ago, there was a lot of literature and a lot of talk about achieving strategic partnership between like the CEO and the head of HR. And so there was a lot of push about getting a seat at the table, achieving that strategic partnership. What I studied and my graduate school thesis was around, can you achieve that strategic partnership at the next level? Like today, what we would call the HR business partner and the client. And so it was a relatively new idea at the time, but it was one that I saw that NASA was moving towards. And I think a little bit ahead of its time in how it structured HR and how it achieved those partnerships. And so it was great to be part of that and learn that from the inside and grow over time with that.
That speaks to something I don't know if a lot of people know, and I'm a moron with a lot of this stuff, but when you say HRBP, I'm familiar with that role. Mm-hmm. What's unique or different about a business partner, somebody that's in HR that's a business partner, beyond I listen to complaints or I solve crises that I'm going to go drink and tell my friends about, even though I shouldn't yet. What's unique about an HRBP versus just a generalist or somebody that's working with people?
Great question. So I think you said it earlier about how I was speaking about the business, knowing the business.
That's right.
That's really where it starts. So the model at NASA, our HR, we call them HR reps and then HR business partners over time, we would sit in staff meetings, technical staff meetings, kind of understand what was going on in the business. And then it was our responsibility then to go figure out, okay, what are the right workforce strategies and HR strategies that can help push the business forward. And so we would sit with the leader of those organizations and say, hey, here are some ideas about, employee engagement, culture. How do you develop your workforce? How are you developing your leaders? How are we preparing successors? NASA is a unique model in that probably 95% of the leadership roles are filled internally. So
Oh, wow.
it's a lot about internal development and growth. They'll pull in people from their contractor workforce
Hmm.
um, that's kind of the staffing model at NASA is that like at the Johnson Space Center, you have 3,000 government employees. There's about 10,000 contractors that work nearby. So that's your pool of talent that you draw from for mid-level leadership roles. So that's a lot of what an HRBP does differently. You're accomplishing all the basic HR stuff. You're taking care of the paperwork. You're taking care of the reassignments, employee counseling. Fortunately, at NASA, you didn't have a lot of employee relations issues or investigations, but you did have a portion of that.
Sure.
But yeah, it's going to that next level of understanding the business, and then how do you contribute? How do you get a people oriented approach and strategy to the business?
Wow, I love that you just call it investigations.
Yeah,
Instead of headaches, nightmares,
yeah, yeah.
funny situation. No, but investigations. And now I know that your job was really boring without a lot of those.
Right.
So you mentioned leadership development as one of the things that you
Yep.
would focus on, and I know this is something that's important to you, obviously, from our initial questions. I want to talk about Space Center Houston, but sort of as a path to get there.
Yeah.
What 30 years of working with people
Mhm.
and then developing leaders. I don't know at what point you sort of
Mhm.
came into that and focused on that. Um, I guess talk to us about your biggest lessons learned in doing that, and maybe even some of the not specific programs necessarily,
Yeah.
but the tactics that seem to work the
Yep.
best.
Yeah. No, great question, Sean. So, um, I started focusing on leaders and their importance to the organization very early as a junior consultant. So, in my initial years, I think I had a sense for the importance of that frontline leader role to culture and engagement.
Hmm.
And over time, I kind of learned that yeah, Gallup shows that anywhere from 60 to 70% of engagement scores are driven by that relationship.
Hmm.
And so that's always been back there for me. And when I got to Space Center Houston, um, I had years at NASA of how we develop leaders, and we didn't really have much in way of a leadership development strategy or an approach at Space Center Houston.
Hmm.
And I just brought over kind of the strategy that we used at NASA. So we followed the um, kind of 70-20-10 principle of the Center for Creative Leadership. So that
Okay.
says 70% of your development is on the job. It's the assignments you have. It may be special projects. It may be rotations to other areas, but 70% of your development is there. 20% is based on contacts. So that's your mentors. That's also executive coaching plays in there. And then 10% is learning new skills through training courses.
Interesting.
That framework is really important, was really important for us at NASA. It's been important here because usually when you talk leadership development, leaders jump right to, hey, I need to send people to a training class.
Hmm.
And so, or I need that here. So what we did at Space Center Houston is we first said as we grow, half of our new positions will be filled by internal talent.
Hmm.
So that was a big move for us because usually the new positions we recruited externally. And with that, we said, hey, we need a training and development approach to kind of build leaders up. To accomplish the 20% on the contacts, we started a mentoring program. And then I brought over from NASA. NASA had used the Better Up organization, which does leadership and executive coaching virtually.
Oh, wow.
And so we were able to bring that to Space Center Houston. And just to give you a sense of scale, NASA was 18,000 employees. Space Center Houston is, we're about 200 full time, about 450 total. We have about 25 to 30 leadership roles. So We were bringing those tools there. And then we didn't really have any leadership courses. So we brought in a 3-day course that gave folks kind of the basic understanding of influence skills and how they could be better leaders. But those strategies and approaches, Sean, I'm speaking at a conference here in Houston about um, building out of this world leaders. It's not rocket science because a lot of the approach can be used anywhere.
Yeah. I like that you have the. I'm not a big numbers guy. Meaning, I like numbers because then I can get creative to solve problems. So as soon as I have 70, 20, 10 or 50% of the leaders, but I've never heard, having been in this business, 20 plus years, I've never heard the 70, 20, 10 before. And I can be a curmudgeon, probably more in my brain. It's probably more 70, 29, 1 kind of setup and pulling these things together. Did you in general did in your career, did you see that model kind of fit even for you personally, the 70, 20, 10?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So on the 70% side, and actually what I'll be talking about at this conference on Monday is showing the map of my career. So I spent about 10 years as an internal consultant, and then I moved into a frontline leadership role of the consulting group that I was part of. Then I moved over to a frontline leadership role in training and development. Then I went off to Washington, D.C. to headquarters to learn that perspective. And then I got outside of NASA to learn from the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation. I spent some time with them as well.
Wow.
As part of a leadership development opportunity. Then I came back and I was the deputy HR director for about 3 years. And then I went and spent 9 months as a frontline leader in engineering. Because again, we talked about the importance of that frontline leader role to employee engagement and culture.
Yeah.
And I wanted to walk in the shoes of that role for a while. Now, I got a little bit of the side eye going from deputy HR director to a frontline leader. Why is the HR guy here? And what's going on? What's wrong with our organization? But fortunately, we got beyond that and we're able to move forward. But then I moved into the HR executive role here in Houston. Then I was able to move into a role where I supervised the HR executives across the NASA Field Center. So the 70% for me was progressively more responsible roles, broadening perspectives. So there was a lot of intentionality to grow and develop me as a leader. The 20%, the mentoring and coaching was also huge. Having not just mentoring from my supervisors, which were always awesome, and they always gave great mentoring advice and perspective. But I had mentors outside the organization as well, where I could learn different perspectives and, again, broader perspective of the organization. And then going to leadership courses and stuff was, probably 10% of my development. But most of it was that on the job and then getting the mentoring and coaching.
Wow, we have to back up because you said something I've never heard happen, at least in my career and everything else. You went and headed an engineering team. That's remarkable to go from HR to heading an engineering team. If I thought about doing that, I think that they would start testing me with engineering content. It would be like, all right, Shawn, tell me about Kubernetes, or tell me about like inference and training AI systems or something. I'll be like, come on. Yeah. Tell me about that transition. How did you mentioned like it was weird, but then you worked through it.
Yeah. So, and I want to be real clear here too, because we had, there was a branch, it was a branch level job in an engineering division that, the way the engineering organization was structured, you had a branch chief and then a deputy branch chief. And in a lot of cases, the deputy branch chief kind of helped with administrative work or other things. So I went into that deputy branch chief role. So it was actually a step back from a deputy HR director was a step below kind of the executive team.
Yeah, yeah.
And we actually had a peer level organization around that. And then stepping into a deputy branch chief role, where I wasn't responsible for technical decisions. So I was looking a lot at how the culture was, how the engagement. I was assigned to one branch that actually had issues with employee engagement, and so I worked a lot with that team and that leader. One of the things we realized is they were feeling underappreciated. A lot of them, they were having some attrition in that area. Some of the younger engineers were leaving, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, the leader was one. Um, Probably more micromanaging than he needed to be.
Yeah.
He wanted to know where everyone was, wanted to know, and I would remember sitting in his office going, "Okay, you're in your office. Of your 30 people that are here, are they in their office? Are they working? Are they not? How do you know?
Hmm.
And what does it matter? You're going to evaluate them based on their performance and what you're hearing from the customer, right?
Yeah.
So we had a lot of discussions about that. But on the appreciation side, what was interesting is I took the team through a workshop on the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace and explained to them they could create a culture of appreciation amongst themselves. They didn't have
Hmm.
to wait for the leader
Right.
to do that. They could work together. And as a result of some of those efforts, they were actually one of the lowest scoring employee engagement organizations that we had across NASA. And the next year, they were seen among the top 5 increases at the agency. Now, when I applied for my executive role, I took credit for that, but I don't think that was completely fair. But
Yeah, I took credit for getting out of the way. Like, I don't have to do this. You can do it.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
but
That's that's magical when that happens. Like,
yeah,
isn't it always like that? I feel that way
yeah,
because we talk a lot about top down, bottom up, all those
yep,
types of things. But the teams, organizations, groups of people that take responsibility for something that they may think, no, this has to come
yeah,
from the CEO or this has to come from
exactly. Yeah,
the head of HR. I love it when I see things like that, or I can be a part, or I just get out of the way. Well, so you mentioned engagement, and then the engagement scores that come with it. What do you mean, or what are the elements of, like, when we talk about engagement? Like,
yeah.
what are we saying? What are you saying when you talk about engagement?
So of course the federal government has a way of complicating that quite a bit. So they've got an annual engagement survey, federal
Okay.
employee viewpoint survey that's 145 questions, multiple dimensions. Now NASA really managed that very well because they employees could see they listen to this, they pay attention to this. So
Yeah.
we had response rate my last year of 85%, which
Wow.
yeah, I
That's
mean
high.
that's
Yeah,
that's
that
kind of
is.
unheard of. So when I came here to Space Center Houston, we didn't have any kind of measure of engagement. So I've always been a big fan of the Q12, Gallup's Q12.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically took that and then about another dozen questions from the viewpoint survey to create our engagement survey here. And what I'm looking at are, um, how our supervisors are doing in leading people. What's the general sense of the culture and this as a workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do folks feel included? Are they able to bring their full selves to work? Um, so there's about 30 questions we have on our engagement survey, which we're actually releasing. We actually just released today for this year, but we used that last year. We used the results. The 2 big themes that came out for us last year were, again, people didn't feel
Mm.
recognition was consistent across the organization. So we put an employee team together and said, hey, let's look at our recognition program. They came up with an idea of an annual recognition event where we're looking at different award categories about
Yeah.
service, leadership, accomplishment. They came up with the categories, kind of designed that. We had the first event here in August. Um, And then the second team was looking at our performance system. So we had a lot of indicators in the survey around people were reluctant to give feedback to leaders, and then also um, just the notion of their opinions counting. Um, and so we brought in external training around giving and receiving feedback, some practical tools that people could use to give their perspective, and then leaders to listen and hear those perspectives.
Yeah.
And then we brought a team together to kind of revamp our performance planning and appraisal system and process as well. So that's borrowing that's the NASA approach. What we did at NASA every year is we looked every organization level that had enough aggregate responses would get a report, and then
Mm-hmm.
they were encouraged to look for, hey, pick one or two things you're going to focus on and improve them, and then tell the employees, hey, we're doing this based on what you told us in the survey.
Yeah.
And so that's what has led to that response rate and that level of engagement at NASA. And there's always things you can do to make the organization better and to improve. And then pulling employees in on the solution, having teams of people create the
Mm-hmm.
solutions, it adds to the engagement.
Yeah. That second part of doing
Mhm.
something after the engagement
Yeah,
survey
yeah,
surprisingly doesn't happen a lot. I've noticed, and there's a part of me that, in chatting with executives or team members, comms teams, HR, or whatever, if we know we're not going to do anything, or that we don't have the bandwidth
yeah.
to do anything, I don't know
Don't
what we
ask.
get doing the
Don't ask.
survey, right?
Yeah,
Don't,
don't
don't,
ask.
don't.
Yep. Yeah. Hey, Sean, that actually, I would describe my first 10 years or so at NASA, maybe 10 to 15, being that way. So the government, you participated in the survey. I mean, this survey was administered whether you did anything with it or not.
Right, right.
And I think people assume automatically that, hey, you worked at NASA, so NASA has always been number one on these things. Well, my first 10, 15 years, we were probably in, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 range. No one really paid attention to it. No one did anything with the data.
Wow.
Um, and we had a new leader of HR who came in and said, hey, I really want to focus on this. And so that was her strategy and approach was we're going to attack the two or three things with the most growth potential. And so one at the time was we weren't really big on telework. This was many years ago when it wasn't a big thing.
Tele
And
telework. I
telework,
know.
yeah, yeah,
I know it was many years ago when you called it
yes,
telework.
yes.
You're like, hey kids, remote. What are you talking about? Telework. Yeah, that's
Telework,
good.
yes.
Yeah.
So she started an initiative called Work from Anywhere, and then really pushed this notion of, hey, you could a lot of roles at NASA could work from anywhere, and um, that initiative and that push greatly closed the gap on that particular engagement element. That one, there was work life balance. We called it work life fit at
Yeah.
NASA because we said, hey, there's really never going to achieve balance, but you got
Hmm.
to figure out what's the right fit between your work and your life priorities.
Yeah.
So yeah, focusing on those couple of things. So we did that year, and then each year after, and we rose to number one, and then for the 12 years since, NASA has been number one. But it wasn't always that way, and it took intentional effort to get there. And that's the story I like to tell other organizations because it wasn't what we did was not unique to NASA. I mean,
Hmm.
the approach we took and how we looked at the data, how we listened, and then how we engaged employees and solutions, again, can be done anywhere. It's definitely not rocket science.
Well, that's the impression I get about the stories that I hear about at NASA, the work, or a lot of scientific endeavors. It's this relentless forward progress.
Yeah,
So even if it's not as far as you were hoping to get, or not as far as you want to get, you're you're moving forward, just a little bit at a time. Huh. Well, I'm at the risk of asking you a question that you've already answered, because a lot of times when we talk about some of these elements, in engagement, leadership, things like that, I'm wondering what your opinion is or your insights are into trust, and the the best ways to build trust with an employee. Maybe some of the ones that aren't as obvious as do what you'll say you're going to do. Like, are there other
Right.
things that in your 30 plus years, I mean, you've gone from how big was NASA? It's 18,000. Is that what you said?
Eighteen
The
thousand employees
That's
across
amazing.
the agency. Yeah.
Yeah, and then down to and then then to 200, where you know
Yeah.
everybody by name and give high
Right.
fives every day. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what I guess all the way across all of that, tell me a little bit about, or share a little bit with us about trust.
Yeah. So from a NASA context, trust was a huge part of building culture for us. So we talked about trying to build a culture of inclusion and innovation. So we made the tie from, there's a lot of different perspectives. You're bringing in diverse perspectives. You're building inclusion where everyone's voice is heard, and then
Hmm.
you lead to more creative and innovative outcomes. As part of our training strategy around that, we actually used Covey's Speed of Trust,
Oh,
both
interesting.
for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
organization and for leaders, because that training has a lot of practical behaviors, practical tips for leaders and teams about how to build trust. So highly recommend that. Um, I would say here, what I've observed, what I've seen, particularly in a smaller context, is again another practice I saw at NASA. If every employee counts, then every leader, like myself, needs to get to know every employee, make sure
Hmm.
they're greeting them, make sure the door is open, um, talk to them regularly. So I try to engage, um, at least with our people leaders. I'm engaging with everyone at least once a year.
Hmm.
Um, Most of them more frequently, depending on the organization and the size.
Yeah,
And then I have opportunities where I'll host a Ask Me Anything lunch,
yeah.
or if we have different policy changes coming out with an opportunity just for an informal dialogue. Hey, here's what's changing. Do you have questions? We have a lot of different ways people can ask HR questions. So we have
Hmm.
those kind of forums, which can be intimidating for some. So we put up QR codes that are anonymous of, hey, ask us anything. We'll put it out in our weekly newsletter,
Yeah.
what the answer is. Um, so we try to do a lot of different things to build that trust. Where I have seen both at NASA and here, when leaders are not trusted is when they don't treat everyone with the same level of respect. If
Hmm.
it depends on your position title or where you are, whether I as a leader am going to speak to you, that creates distrust. It's interesting at NASA when we select astronauts. There's an extensive assessment process. There's
Right.
extensive, but some of the key differentiators are the discussions we have with the receptionists and the nurses. How did that candidate treat you?
Oh,
Did
wow.
you,
Wow.
and they don't feel like that's part of the process, right? Because it's not the formal. But at NASA, teamwork is hugely valuable, and so we've had some really top-notch, smart people be screened out because they're treating certain team members as lesser than, and I think that's an important lesson.
Well, so two things related to what you're saying. So I get the impression that the type of leader that you are and how you encourage people to build trust is that the people that you work with probably know your favorite Star Wars characters, or what you like to eat for breakfast.
Sure, yeah,
Is that true? Like that they get to know you that well?
yeah. I think I'm a pretty open book with what I like on some of that stuff, and um, I can also be kind of silly too. That was a technique I would use at NASA. I remember I was working with one team that they said, "Hey, we don't sing for birthdays and do that kind of thing." Well, we were having some difficult budget conversations. The mood of the room was just dreary, and so I said, "Hey, let's sing Happy Birthday to Joe." So we did, and Shawn, I can't sing, so um, that lightened the mood. People were laughing, and I go, I need to find more opportunity. So I found more opportunity. We sang for Safety Day and different things, and just um, try to lighten the tone and the mood a little bit. And
This leans towards, we talked briefly before the show about servant leadership. And I thought, of course, I would bring it up and you'd be like, what's that? And then I would explain it to you like a genius. But you mentioned that you do use that, or you appreciate that. And the one thing that I brought up, I'm interested to learn more about your take on it, is one of the things I loved about servant leadership that I always remember is the managing your employees like they're volunteers, like that they could just walk tomorrow. They don't need you. They don't need this job. So how do you treat them in a situation? So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that, and then just servant leadership in general. You teach leadership. Do you use some of those elements in what you teach?
Yeah, absolutely, Shawn. So I've ever since I've stepped into a management position, a leadership role, I've looked at it as an opportunity to serve. I read a long time ago, a friend of mine wrote a book on shepherd leadership where he talked about it's a leader's responsibility to remove the irritants like a shepherd does with sheep. Figure out what's irritating them and remove those irritants, and remove barriers that your team has. So it's kind of your role to run interference, help them out, and figure out how you can serve them so they can be at their best for the organization. And I think, that's long been a philosophy and approach that has resonated. We try to teach at NASA. I still say we, but at NASA, when leaders are moving from individual contributors to leadership roles, a lot of times they were selected because they're the technical expert. They're the smartest person in the room, right? And we had to teach them, as you move into that role, you've got to train yourself to use coaching skills, to ask questions. Because if you're constantly giving answers, you're not going to grow the capacity of the team. You're the team's lid, right?
Right.
And that might be a high lid. I mean, given your technical expertise, but this is another reason we created that dual career track, because we said, hey, if you want to continue to be the technical expert, we've got a path for you. If you want to grow technical expertise in your function and in your field, that those are the people we want in our management and leadership positions. And so you're asking questions, you're developing those creative solutions from your team. The role becomes more of coaching and facilitation and less of giving the answer. That's another aspect of, I think, the servant leadership model that we try to push as well.
Yeah, that's I've often thought about it or heard about it turning the hierarchy sort of sideways.
Yeah.
And the way you describe it is almost, I was trying to picture in my mind, it's completely inverted.
Yeah.
So that you have the employee at the top, you have the people that you're trying to support, and what are you doing to make that happen? Example from been in communications, employee engagement, to HR for a long time, and Simpler sponsors this show. This is their show, and so they have a platform that then tries to make it easier to engage with employees. And sometimes we fall into the trap of, well, I told you, we published this, like, what do they call it? The read the freaking manual, get into this. No, I told you what to do. Do what I told you to do. If you missed it, it's your fault. It was in your email instead of, right.
Yes.
Instead of, oh no, what can I do differently?
Yeah.
to help you? What can I do differently to make sure that you know what's going on? How can I meet you where you are instead of demanding that you meet me where I'm at?
That's Shawn. That's actually the one of the first tips that I share with leaders is I ask, hey, what's your most powerful leadership tool?
Mm.
And I maintain that it's a mirror. And I said, when your expectations as a leader aren't met, or when you're in conflict with someone, pull out your most powerful tool and start with yourself.
Mm.
Were the expectations clear? What could you have done differently to contribute to a better outcome?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's a very, very much along those lines. When you were talking about kind of the inverted triangle,
Right.
if you will,
Yeah.
the other piece to that we like to talk about that we add to that is at the top is your customer. So
Mm.
as a leader, you're holding up, you're trying to remove barriers, remove irritants of your team, who is then
Hmm.
serving the customer. So
Mm.
the ultimate goal of kind of the people profit chain, if you will,
Yep.
moves from the leader through the team ultimately to the customer.
Well, and that's where vision mission comes from. I
Yeah,
mean, you
yeah,
could try to have an organization where our vision is make you all rock stars, but that doesn't. It doesn't. It's hard to rally behind that.
right,
If it's
right,
go to Mars, that's a little bit easier to rally behind that and find out where are we at, what's going on, what are the latest. And it's
yep,
don't get me wrong, that's probably long term vision type of thing.
sure,
It might just be the I don't know, make the wheels for the rover, and everybody gets behind
yeah,
that. Yeah, in order to make that a reality for the
yep,
customer. Well, a couple other quick questions. I want to understand a little bit because I love talking. Of course, you were there for a long time at NASA.
mhm.
Are there any differences between what you focused on at NASA, heading up HR, talking doing leadership development, people development, engagement, things like that, going from 18,000? Of course, there's changes, but I want to know what they are
Yeah,
to a 200. And
right,
it's a nonprofit, right?
nonprofit.
The Space Center
Yep,
Houston. Yeah.
yep.
What have been some of the differences? Things that are rewarding or easier, and things that are more challenging, maybe.
Yeah, so I think it starts with, we talked earlier about the importance of knowing the business. And so the business at NASA was, and most of the employees, I mean, three-fourths of the employees are scientists and engineers.
Right.
Moving over to Space Center Houston, we're a nonprofit in the museum industry.
Mm.
So our employees are very different. The work and the business is very different because we're trying to engage. Yes, our purpose is to bring people in space closer together. So we're out there on the front lines trying to help people understand the past, present, and future of human spaceflight, understand that story,
Hmm.
showing different artifacts, taking them to the Johnson Space Center to see astronaut training, to see mission control. Um, but the people and the talent are different. So I would say what's similar is the strategies and approaches you can take to build culture, to build leaders, to develop teams. But when you bring in the knowing the business and
Hmm.
and knowing the kind of talent that you need to bring to bear, you've got to really understand that because it's very different. The two organizations are very different, and the talent that is needed to make their missions and organizations successful. So I always think in terms of, probably because we use this a lot at NASA, I think in terms of Venn diagrams.
Yeah.
And so there's the NASA side of things, Space Center Houston, there's some overlap of commonality in the role and what you can bring, but there's a lot of uniqueness as well. From an HR perspective, Shawn, this has been, I call it a playground because NASA is highly regulated. HR is, the rules. We prided ourselves at NASA in the federal space of figuring out how to accomplish the mission
Hmm.
within the rule set and not bothering our customers with the rules. We figured out solutions. Um, Over here, we get to make it up as we
Right.
go.
Yeah.
So it's like
Did you
it's
hear that? Did you hear that, team?
it,
Brady's making it up.
Right. It's unconstrained. I mean, it's just there's a beauty in not having that level of constraint.
So within our jobs, and I guess there's a couple of different ways to think of it. There's generative AI, so
Hmm.
on creating the content, sort of developing a companion feels like a weird word, but like
Hmm. Yeah.
your AI that you work with and things like that.
Hmm.
How do you see it? I don't want to sound dystopian here,
Yeah.
because I think that there's something magical about person to person. But
Hmm.
do you see AI playing a role in leadership and employee development? And if you do, like, what's good about that, and
Hmm.
maybe what's risky about that, or even what do you see? You've been doing this a long time. If you could predict a year or 2 years from now, what do you see?
Yeah, I think what really resonated for me, Sean, is earlier this year I was uh, had an opportunity to speak at some global HR conferences, and it was
Hmm.
on digital transformation and global HR.
Yeah,
And Dubai, Kuala Lumpur, and these leaders are coming together talking about the future of AI.
yeah,
And there's a lot of panic about, hey, AI is going to take jobs. It's going to, game changer. And I think there's a recognition in our field that yes, it's a game changer. But what really resonated for me is there was the storyline that was kind of throughout those conferences that AI itself may take very few jobs that are structured today. But
hmm,
more importantly, the people who know how to use AI will take jobs of people who don't know how to use it. So figuring out how do you manage AI, how do you leverage it as a tool,
yeah.
will give you a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And I think we're scratching the surface of it here at Space Center Houston. We're leveraging it to help us with, some of the mundane tasks of job descriptions, um, different writing things, right? Helping with policy. What I've found with a lot of it is it'll give you an 80 or 90% uh, good answer, and so
Yeah,
then you're
head start.
refining, and so
Hmm.
that saves you a lot of time and gives you opportunity to focus your time and energies on other things. And so
Yeah.
um, I think we're going to continue to get smarter about how to leverage it from a leadership development perspective. I think, um, yeah, I think we're going to have to figure out how we prepare our leaders to not only use it, but how do they get comfortable with the team and the organization uh, leveraging it as a tool. I think of it as it's another tool that has come along.
One thing that gave me comfort recently was possibly there's a coach that's AI, and it feels an awful lot like a person, and maybe you don't even tell me that it's
Right.
not a person, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm interacting with them, and they're great, totally amazing, very very smart, of course, like all of human whatever that goes into it. But there's enough of a difference. Like if I want to buy a gridded, like high tech fleece whatever jacket to go into the mountains, now I can get that just mass produced. Robots make it, and I could buy that, and it could be high end.
Hmm.
We call it Patagucci, or some of those other things.
Right.
But if I know somebody local that just like hand makes and makes these things really just amazing, I might pay extra just because I don't know. It feels silly. Is it as good
Right.
as the other one? Maybe not, but it's
Yeah.
human. Like there's something about the artisanship, and perhaps I don't know. Like
Yep.
it seems to make sense based off of servant leadership, the connection, building trust, knowing who it is that you're working with. Those things will still be important. I think you're right. It'll be a mix, and not
Yeah. I,
yeah.
I
They'll
mean,
say no.
there's a lot to even our connection here, Sean, of just nonverbals, of kind of emotional connection that it's going to be hard. That part is hard to replicate, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
not to say it won't ever be replicated, but um, at least right now, it's the human to human connection, the amount of communication that isn't verbal or text. is still a big part of our lives.
Brady, so this has been awesome. Before I let you go, can you let our audience know where they can find out more about you, where they can learn about Space Center Houston? You got a you got a book on the way or something else coming through?
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you, Sean. I definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm out there, Brady Pyle on LinkedIn. Also out there on Twitter as well. Space Center Houston is spacecenter.org. Got a website there, and if any of your listeners are ever in the Houston area, definitely look me up, and I'd love to catch up when you're here and kind of show you this place. We have about 1.3 million guests a year, so
Wow.
it's a fun place to visit, fun place to see. I've got a blog site called outofthisworldleadership.com. It's in the process of being revamped and updated. Had about 10 years of content out there on it, and trying to get it updated now. And soon, early next year, we'll have a book out there entitled "Out of This World Leadership." So be on the lookout for that.
Awesome. Yeah, relentless forward progress. That's perfect. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show, and keep in touch. I'll find you on the LinkedIn and make my way to Houston. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Sounds great, Sean. Thank you so much.